we've been working with Treball Solidari, which is this Spanish NGO that supports women micro-entrepreneurs, mostly from Africa and Latin America that are currently living here in Spain. And they support them in many different ways, mostly with access to microcredits and access to training. And after a couple of weeks of working together, we have just published their first proper impact evaluation. They came to us with a problem that I think a lot of organizations are currently facing. And it's that they know their program was working. They were seeing the results. They were seeing how they were changing people's lives, but they didn't have a way to prove their impact, to show it. So that's exactly what we built together.
Yeah. Exactly. And if we put a little bit of context to this, so traditionally a microfinance institution would, if you go back 20 years, they would pay people to go out face to face and interview people. If you go back another 10 years, they may, have a call center calling people. But I think the innovation here was that we used avatars, right? That we could send directly to these women.
Exactly. And it was, let's say, cheaper than traditional methods, and it was more scalable. So they're actually working with about 600 women, and we were able to interview almost 300 of them in a very short period of time. This is a very crucial time for NGOs and organizations in general, because as you know, and we all know, traditional aid is falling off a cliff. So I was actually reading this article the other day published by The Conversation that said that in 2024, the United States spent about $68 billion in foreign aid. And by 2025, that number dropped to roughly $32 billion, which is half in just 1 year. And we're not just talking about the US. We can see the same situation with the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, the Netherlands. So it's a generalized situation. So if you're an NGO or a traditional organization, basically the pot you've been living on for 20 years is basically shrinking.
Yeah. And what's quite nice from our perspective is obviously, 3 years ago, we set up a business. We were trying to figure out, would actually anyone talk to an avatar? And the results are in 3 years later, they absolutely will, across, 40 different countries, across many different contexts. And my sense is that people will either do data collection in these contexts in sort of one or two ways. You'll use either avatars or conversational agents to get in touch with people and have dynamic conversations. And the nice thing about that is it's scalable, digitizable, and reportable faster. Or you'll probably have very high end, quite expensive, research functions, which may get you more information. But if we switch to, because Treball, run by Tony and the team, do great work. What were they doing? What were they trying to find out? And what were like some of the findings you found?
So basically they were trying to find a way to report on their impact. So, they are funded by the EU. They are collaborating with many European organizations, and they've been running this program for, I think it's 15 years. And, this time they hadn't done a proper impact evaluation. So this was their first one because, this is the silver lining in all the situation that I was mentioning, is that even though traditional aid is shrinking, we have been seeing more support from private impact investors or impact funds, because actually impact investing is rising in the market. I think it's currently it has a growth of 19% per year, and is expected to rise to about $400 billion by 2033, which means that it's not that there's no money, but the source of the money has changed from traditional aid to in private investing and private capital. These type of organizations that are funding NGOs like Treball Solidari, they want to actually be able to see the results of their investment and to see something that is measurable and something that is actually proving what they're doing. So that's why this exercise was so important to them. So what we did is that they sent the avatar links to the women they are working with. And in the end, we had 292 of these women that spoke with us in either English or Spanish, because we had 2 digital avatars they could choose from. We had an 89.3 completion rate, which means that from the 327 women that started, 292 completed, which is a very, as you know, that number is very high. It's actually mad, but it proves how well the communication is going between the organization and the people they're serving.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then one of the things that you worked really hard on with some of our contacts at the European Commission was measuring against this European pillar of social rights. So it might be worth just discussing that briefly.
Basically, this is a target that the EU has set for 2030, which means that they want to see more employment rate. They want to see more adults receiving training. They want to see social change that is, again, measurable. So they have a set of indicators, and we built this whole impact evaluation so we would be able to report directly to the European Pillar of Social Rights. And by doing so, you are directly reporting to the European institutions. So the European Commission, the Council, the Parliament.
And one of the things that we've talked a lot about is if you can come up with, or if you're working with a framework that exists, and you find a new methodology to do it. The interesting thing is you're able to do that type of reporting on a pretty regular basis. So, you know, do you want to do it as a longitudinal analysis over, you know, once a year, twice a year? Do you want to do it across a number of different ones in your portfolio? I mean, I was talking to a microfinance impact investor in Mexico a few weeks ago, and this is the kind of thing that they've never been able to do. They've never been able to ask these questions of their investees on a fairly regular basis at anything like a cost-effective price. So we clearly, and we're talking our own book, and yeah, this is our business, but we think that's a really interesting idea to be able to take a framework, send out these avatars, or send out these conversational agents, get feedback on impact, and ideally sometimes maybe change some of the programming that's being happening as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, you know, sometimes people think that it's just a service you're providing, but in this case, the organization was actually very involved in the whole process. So we started by, you know, defining the framework, the indicators, the questions, and then we built the avatars, and we had to make sure that the avatars actually sounded like the people they work with. And that's why we had an avatar that could communicate in Spanish with an accent from Latin America, and another avatar with an African accent. And these two technological solutions, let's say, were representing the women they work with. And it was a very fast process. You know, when you think about it, it only took 5 weeks, including not only data collection and analysis, but also planning, which is very fast if you compare it to, you know, a traditional monitoring and evaluation survey conducted by an NGO, for example.
I agree. And just to go to the results for a second, because I think it's really important to call out Treball's work, because, you know, the work of Treball Solidari is really important. And, you know, a lot of these women have come from very different parts of the world, may not have been able to speak Spanish very well when they first came to the country, for example, or you know, the language that they needed to transact in was difficult. But in terms of their monthly income, you've got, out of the, you know, just under 300 participants, you've got 70, you know, you've probably got about 80 who are seeing their monthly income, you know, go up by $500 to $1,000. And then you've got another, you know, probably over 50 going up monthly by $1,000 to $2,000, $1,000 to €2,000, which is real money. I mean, that, you know, when it comes to monthly income, is really significant. And so, A, Tony and team should be very proud of that. But B, I think that's going to make a tremendous difference in those entrepreneurs' lives. And one of the things I'd be interested in is as a result of that, clearly, you know, I think their quality of life will have improved, and, you know, the household income's improved, as we've seen from the results. I wonder if there's the golden sort of nugget of all of European politics right now is job employment and growth, and trying to figure out how we can grow our economies, as we tend to want to tax our citizens more. I wonder if this is a route to being able to create more job opportunities.
Definitely. When you look at the results and you think where these people are coming from, these women, you know, I remember that 94% of them were born outside Spain. So mostly in places like Colombia or Senegal, for example. And many of them came without papers, without legal status. So they were in either irregular situation or they were waiting for asylum. And when you think about, the impact this had on their lives, I mean, most of them were unemployed and were looking for a job. And today, I think it's 83 of these women are running their own business. And it's impressive. I know when you say the number, perhaps you don't realize how important it is, but believe me, and I had the opportunity to meet many of these women, to listen to their stories, and it's impressive how this is changing their lives, and not only their lives, but their families' lives and everyone else around.
We're very excited with Tony's results, and I'm sure his funders will be heartened by that as well, because it really is changing, many women's lives in those, in difficult circumstances. I mean, Talia, you obviously came from a totally different background, but you came from Cuba into Spain, and you've built your own sort of business with us. And I think for some of the stories that you've told me about that, clearly they've come from pretty difficult circumstances, and to be able to build a business, to be entrepreneurial, to create, jobs and livelihoods is fabulous. And one of the things I'd be interested in asking Tony is to say to him, okay, so, he has to, go around the world looking for funding. He has to raise money for these programs. What would be the metric that beyond what he can already show, where, the income is increased by, pretty large amounts per month, where he was able to unlock even more funding? What would be the level? So maybe we can get him on the podcast and ask him.
Yeah, that would be very, very interesting for sure.
Yeah. But no, great work, Talia. I think this is really, really great work. And we think that more of this will happen in the EU. And, we're hopeful that many other microfinance institutions will use this methodology as well.